Hello, and welcome to the From the Desk of podcast. My name is James Kemp, and I'm the managing partner of a company called the Office of the CEO. And our focus is making executives and key leaders more effective through tools and strategies and techniques. And this particular podcast is focused on identifying those leaders in various spaces within the business world that have expertise and that can share strategies and techniques and ideas on how to improve and do things more effectively. Tonight I have Nate Walker, who's a good friend of mine, someone I worked with at Adobe and Omniture in the past, and he's currently a coach. He teaches executives to improve their performance and their on-stage presence, as well as their delivery of presentations in smaller groups or in meetings. And he is the best I've ever worked with in terms of being able to make to help people perform at a higher level. And I am grateful to have him join us tonight, and I look forward to the conversation. Welcome, Nate.
Well, I am Nathan Walker still, just the same as what James said moments ago. And I'm an international speaker and storytelling coach um, and a trainer. I've trained thousands of people on 4 continents and work as a sales accelerator. I'm a certified habit finder coach, and I have worked with companies like Apple, Sony, Disney, Honda, Adobe, Microsoft, um, little groups like that in presentation skills, sales strategies, web analytics, and a handful of other things. So I mostly just traveled around telling people what to do so that I could try nice restaurants all over the world. That was my goal.
Yeah, I don't even want to know how many miles you had. I'm sure you were. They had a picture of you in the headquarters at Delta
Yeah,
that
I,
people would
I
walk
put a lot on.
into. Anyway, as I mentioned, Nathan, he's very uh, humble. I guess that's the word I would use. He's one of the best, if not the best, presenter that I've ever worked with. I've been to a few of his classes, and he was the uh, trainer, the presenter of record at Adobe for quite a few years. Both Nathan and I have left Adobe since that time and have retained our association, and I'm grateful for that. Um, and so I'll tee up the topic. The topic tonight is death by PowerPoint. And I guess the idea for this came from probably hundreds of presentations that I sat through, many of them with in front of a C-level audience. And there were so many things that I saw that were wrong. I would try to prepare people. I would try and give them suggestions. I would try and give them tips on how to build a slide and things of that nature. And for whatever reason, it seems like everybody, especially going into an audience of that nature, there was always a tendency to break all of the rules. And I don't know if it's because they were just nervous, they wanted to be over prepared or whatever. But I saw more 1,000-word slides and multiple bullets and just text heavy slides with no pictures or graphs or anything like that. I saw decks that had 50 slides for a 15-minute presentation slot. Just anything you can possibly imagine. And so the idea for this came from basically from that experience. And when I was thinking about this particular topic, I thought Nathan would just be a great resource to use and to give us feedback on how to approach that. So I'll tee it up to you, Nathan.
All right, cool. Well, there's a reason they call all those bullet points, because death by PowerPoint is definitely a thing. And the problem with it is most people are focused on trying to get their PowerPoint presentations really good. And so they'll focus on one of two things. James, you can jump in and interrupt me at any time and steer me back onto the rails. But
I will.
the biggest thing that I see is that people are either focused on uh, the technicality of the presentation itself. So using features and capabilities found inside of PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever your presentation tool of choice is. So they're either focused on the technicality of that, or they'll say this, and you'll hear this all the time. They'll stand up at the beginning of the presentation and say, okay, people, we've really got a lot of material to get through, and we've only got 40 minutes left. So bear with me. We really got to move through this fast. If you hear that, it's the wrong presentation, and it will be done in a way that's not memorable at all, because your audience can't retain all of that. And so if you're focused on content, you're missing the power of what a presentation is supposed to do. The whole point of a presentation is to produce a desired change in behavior. Too many times we see people try and produce a change in knowledge. Well, knowledge, not changing your knowledge is not the same as changing behavior. Anybody who has kids knows that. I can say to my high school daughter, it's time for you to clean your room. She'll say, Dad, I know. Yeah, her knowing didn't produce the desired behavior. So knowing that she needs to clean her room is really not the answer to everything. Getting the room clean and producing that change in behavior is the answer. So when I work with people on things like presenting, whether it be with a emphasis on presentation skills or on presentation design, the thing that we focus on first is, what behaviors would I like to see different than they are now? And the second thing is that our focus has to be on what to do, not what to use. So if I'm talking to my audience and I start saying this product does this and this product does this and this thing does this, and it doesn't matter if it's an internal or an external audience, at the moment I start having that kind of conversation and I start giving a personality, it's called anthropomorphism, right? I start giving a personality or capability to a product or a feature. Then I'm not telling the right story. The product doesn't do anything. The feature doesn't do anything. People do. And so I have to tell the kinds of stories that help people make changes to behavior that answer business problems. And that's what we're trying to do. So when we begin our presentation, we always have to start thinking about what it is. I think of a better way to explain this. I had someone come to me one time. This was at a Fortune 500 company, and I had been working with a group there about refining their presentations and refining their conversations with customers. And they decided that they should have a company-wide mandate that everyone learn to tell the company story. After one of the sessions that I did, one of the employees came to me. He said, I've got a question for you. Are you familiar with this thing that we're all going through, how to tell the company story? I said, yes, I am. He said, what do you think about it? And I said, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I think about it. He looked very confused. Well, why? I said, because it's the wrong story. So if you're telling your company story and you're trying to make sure that everybody gets a slide that contains every single feature or capability of your shiny object, you're telling the wrong story, because your audience really isn't interested in what you have. They don't want to hear a story about what you have. They want you to tell a story about them to them. That's the most powerful thing you can do. So the first part of this is making sure you're telling the right story, and the right story is not yours. It's theirs. And they want to be told about them. So the change then that you're seeking as you look at revising your presentations is, how can I identify what it is that they want to know about them that will produce a change in behavior that will produce a change in the result? So before I put anything on a slide, I have to have that firmly in my head. The second thing is that it comes across best as a story. Now, there's a pretty good illustration of this. In 2005 ish, I think, I could even look it up. In about 2005, there was a presentation given by Bill Gates. And on it, I wish I could show you the slide right now. I actually have a
We'll figure out a
screenshot
way
from
to
that.
post it because I know which slide you're talking
You know
about.
which one it is, right? There's a screenshot from that presentation. It's Bill Gates standing under this massive screen just covered with words. And the words are all different colors and sizes and everything else. And it says something about, oh, and there were pictures of a bunch of clouds. And he was talking about what Microsoft was going to do in the cloud. And everybody was supposed to be all excited. Well, he talked about digital lifestyle and digital work style. It was so much stuff. There were probably 50 icons on the screen. There were silhouettes, and he's standing in front of it. It was so much stuff that that PC world in an interview, um, in writing about the interview that they gave to Bill Gates and to some of the other people involved in the thing, PC World said, perhaps Bill Gates and company should look to Steve Jobs and Apple for more than just technical inspiration. What a slam. And it had nothing to do with the strategy that Bill Gates was trying to explain. It had everything to do with the way it was presented.
Yeah,
If you look at the
and I
same
think
time period,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Yeah, if you look at the same time period.
sorry, you can go ahead. Keep
No,
going.
you first.
I was just going to say that everybody's seen a Steve Jobs presentation, and can say that he has a much better approach to telling a story than the Microsoft version. So
Yeah, they actually, for years, they actually called it his reality distortion field. So a reporter actually coined that phrase back in the, what, mid 80s or something. Anyway, they called it the reality distortion field because he could present in such a compelling way that you were inclined to believe everything he said, whether or not it was reality. Of course, now that we have seen what his vision has produced, most of it was. But so we're trying to change behaviors, not knowledge, and the best way to do that is in a story form. So if you think about, one of the most famous presentations Jobs ever did was the introduction of the iPhone. And if you watch that, it's available on YouTube. If you watch the way he approached that, it was kind of in story form. He was talking about where we are now and how people engage with each other on devices and how some people carry an iPod and they carry a BlackBerry and they carry something else. And the image on the screen starts to rotate, and there's just one picture on the screen. And people started to applaud before he ever got to his point because that one image, in context of the story he was telling, made it obvious where Apple was going to go. And they introduced the iPhone, one device to rule them all, and changed the entire industry. So you decide that your customer is who you're talking about, whether it's an internal or external customer. You figure out what the behaviors are that need to change to produce desired outcomes. And then that's what you tell them. Inevitably, somebody will say, yeah, but so I'm supposed to do this presentation on, we've revised some of the code that we're using. And so this is a bunch of programmers. So I just got to go in there and tell them what the new code is. And I'm supposed to do a presentation about that. Well, you better not think that that's what you're telling them. Showing them lines and lines and lines of code is not actually what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is get them to buy in to the new approach. So that should be your presentation, right? Then you can show examples of code all day long. But the presentation isn't, here's some code. The presentation is, here's why we made the change. Here's what's different about it. Here's what you should know so you can do it effectively so you can advance our software development, for example.
And Nathan, I've seen that, I'm having Vietnam flashbacks of people that came in doing that. And I think to further that point, these people were coming into a C-level discussion of one of the largest technology firms in the world.
Right.
And none of the people in that room were engineers. None of them wrote code. None of them, they used the products, but they didn't write code. They had no idea. They could have put any code up on the screen they wanted, and they wouldn't have known any different. But the ones that were effective basically took the approach that you just described, and they said, "Look, I always said when people would come in, I'd say, guys, this is a Shark Tank presentation. You are here to
Right.
get more money, to get more budget, to do what you want to do, to drive your business forward. If you bore them to death or you beat them over the head with something, they're going to have a bad taste in their mouth about that initiative, and they don't even have to know about it." And these people
Right.
are very, 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 very important people that cost a lot of money. And every hour that you stand in front of that group of people is worth thousands and thousands of dollars when it comes to productivity and their ability to focus on things. And if you go in with 20 slides in a 15-minute slot, it's going to be a train wreck. And every time somebody tried to do that, it was just because it's almost like people, when they get anxious or nervous about the audience, they put more stuff on the slide, more text, more bullets, more stuff. And it becomes kind of a crutch that they use to get through the presentation, right? The problem is
Yeah. And people very often oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead.
People are often under the mistaken impression that showing more stuff will make them look more intelligent and more capable. But it's actually the opposite. It makes you look less intelligent and less capable. There's a concept that we spend lots of time on in seminars and workshops that I do called cognitive fluency. And boiled down to its easiest description, cognitive fluency is how easy it is for us to think about something. And the result of making it easier to think about is there are three really spectacular results, but one of them is that they trust you more. The other one is that they believe you know what you're talking about. But the third one, and the one that gets often ignored, is they believe that what you're recommending is actually something within their power to do. So by making it easier to think about, you actually transfer a great deal of power to not only your words in your presentation, but to the individuals that you're speaking to. Your audience begins to, your credibility is enhanced in front of them, and they begin to believe more fully that what you're recommending is something that they can actually pull off. And you do that by simplifying the heck out of it. Make it as easy as you possibly can to think about. And then you decide what you're going to show. And now is probably a good time to mention that. So lots of times I've been asked to give a presentation, and they'll say, "I can't make it, so be sure to send me your deck when you're done." And I tell them no. And that usually produces a lot of angst and indigestion and people making funny noises. But PowerPoint is not a book. It's not a communication tool. It's not a textbook. It's not a treatise or a white paper. It's a presentation. And so it's trying to help you tell a story that produces a desired behavior. If there's so much material that they need a lengthy bunch of words to describe what it is, what they should do about it, and how it should be employed, that's what documents are for. So you might think about, instead of sending out your deck when you're done, send out a PDF that includes some of the same images, but much more descriptive information around it. The other thing to consider is that if the deck is going to tell them what they need to know, "I can't make the meeting, just send me your deck and I'll go from there," then what in the heck are you showing up for? There's no reason for you to be there if the deck tells the story.
Yeah.
So,
and I think sometimes people think that if I don't put it in there, they won't believe me. They'll be confused. There won't be enough information. And it's interesting. One of the things that I always thought was really strange was Shanu Narayan, who is the CEO of Adobe, and I'm not saying he's strange, but one of the things I thought was strange and was also a huge bear trap was he asked for a pre-read. So a lot of people ask for the slide deck after the presentation. He would ask for the slide deck before the presentation, and he would use it to tee up traps for people, right? And he didn't do it in a negative way. He didn't do it to make people feel bad or whatever, but he looked at the deck and he figured out the areas that he had concerns with about the particular proposal or presentation, and he would be ready to pounce, so to speak, on those components. And what I told people is, I said, you want to make your PowerPoint small and not very descriptive. You want to give him a heads up of kind of what's going on and that, but you don't want to put too much in there, because those bear traps will be established for you, and it'll put you off right at the beginning. And it was interesting. I think he did it on purpose, and he's crazy like a fox this way. He tried to, kind of put people on off ease, or, they're a little bit nervous or anxious. And the reason he did that is because he found that he got the accurate picture when he did that. And it wasn't to make him look bad or feel bad. It was, he wanted to get them off the talking points and get them onto the actual issues. And so, people would prep and come in and, practice and come in and be ready to go and that kind of thing. And then he would kind of knock them off stride a little bit. And he did it because there was too much stuff in their presentation, and he wanted to get down to the brass tacks of it, right? Down to the essence of it.
Right.
And
if you want to know what you're actually saying, say it. Yeah. But don't show them a bunch of other stuff, because it's all distraction, right? So everybody's trying to sort through the noise. Everybody in your audience is trying to sort through the noise, and they almost always have a variety of ulterior motives, whether intentional or not. And so the more stuff you give them, the more they tend to sit and fixate on some point you just made that really wasn't the central message that you're trying to deliver. And they mentally wander off in the weeds and never, ever get what it is you're talking about. If you tell it in a simple story form with very few words, very few images, and well thought out analogies, they'll remember it for a long time. All of us remember the story of the three little pigs from when we were kids. The reason we remember it is because it was delivered in story form. So if you want people to know what it is you're actually doing, right? So let's go back to that really mundane example. Yeah, we've done a code review and we've decided to change the code in the following way. We're presenting to an internal audience. Here's what you need to know. Then I would tell it in a story form, even if they're the story. For the past couple of years, we've been struggling with this and this and this. We get tired and frustrated because the following is not happening. And after a great deal of work, we figured out what the solution to the problem is. Let's talk today about what we're going to do and how it will help us. And then that's the story you tell. You don't spend any time, or spend very little time, on what to use or how it will be done. And you spend your time on what is going to be done, and here's the effect that it will have. And if you couch it in a story form, they'll remember it. People tend to remember between 3 and 7 out of every 100 things. So let's be generous. Let's say your audience is going to remember 5% of what you say. If you stand up there with a slide that's got 50 bullet points on it, and the next slide has another 50, and so on down the road, you're guaranteeing that your audience is going to remember almost nothing. And the more you dilute it with additional information, the worse the problem gets and the lower their retention is. If you want people to retain what it is you're saying and have it come across as credible, then simplicity is your best friend. More information is not your friend. Knowledge is not what they need. A simple approach, a simple story is what they need. And retention goes way, way up. So I am, at the risk of sounding like I'm tooting my own horn, I did deliver a presentation to an audience of about 1,000 people a few years ago. And I found out 9 years later that every new employee was being shown that presentation because it was a story about refinishing my floor. And the refinishing of the floor was an analogy for a customer service experience that we were trying to get everyone to adopt. They can remember the story. If I had talked about the research that we had done, saying, this is approximately what customers will respond to best, and we believe that we should have these phrases that we all adopt now, nobody would remember squat. They just wouldn't remember it at all.
Nathan, I've seen in my experience, I know when a presentation's going off the rails, when people start looking down at their computers or they pick up their phone.
Yep.
Last year, we went to a Bon Jovi concert, right? 2 years ago, maybe. And the Bon Jovi I remember was the crazy guy running around on the stage with the long, the big hairband hair and crazy. And that wasn't the Bon Jovi we came to see. And the sad thing is you looked around the arena and there were a lot of people looking on their phones. And if you go to a concert and you have a group of individuals in the audience that are reading their phones, you know that you've got a problem. And
yep.
I would look around the table and I would be like, oh man, this is going to be ugly, because as soon as people check out, they start looking down and they start shuffling papers or moving things around, shifting in their seats, and you've lost them. And the other thing that I found is that if they're looking at your slide, not you, you've lost.
Yeah, there can only be one presenter. So you're always competing with what's on the screen. So either the screen helps to reinforce the story, and that's why I talk about story all the time, or G's all the time. You can use something as an object lesson to reinforce a story or an analogy. If the story or analogy is compelling enough, then the image on the screen will be processed by your viewers as evidence that you're telling the truth. If what you show on the screen is complicated and you're not telling it in story form or not using analogies, then instead of evidence, it comes across as competition. And so you'll hear somebody yammering on about all of these things they've learned and what they think they ought to do. And so they had a meeting about it. And during the meeting, it was proposed that somebody do such and such. And they've got a quote sitting on the screen while they're talking. You get one or the other, but you can't have both. So retention drops to zero, literally zero. So later people say, well, how come we're not doing this? Well, I talked about it in my presentation. Weren't you there? Well, yeah, I was there, but I don't remember that. Well, now you know why. So if they're checking out, it's because they're overwhelmed by information or it's not relevant and processed in a way that they can retain it. And this has nothing to do with intelligence. We're all wired this way. That's why that cognitive fluency thing that I mentioned is so important. Making things easy to think about makes retention go up, increases your credibility, the audience's belief in your abilities, and the audience's belief in their own ability to do what you're recommending. So if you want them to pay attention and do what you're proposing, keep it simple. So if there's something that has to be on the screen, let it be a quote that you actually read while they're reading it. If you've got to have bullet points, have, 2 or 3. And the bullet points are just pointers to the most salient points of your message. If you're telling a story and you say, most people like brown shoes, but we've learned that some creative people like colorful shoes, and some people like no shoes at all. I might have the words brown shoes, colorful shoes, and no shoes on the screen, but that's it. And if there's some reason I'm telling that will be reinforced on the following slide.
So question for you, Nathan, as you're going through your presentation, and this is less so for a speech to a large audience, like you mentioned,
Right.
1,000 people. It's more of a little bit more of an intimate setting, a boardroom, for example. How do you keep from allowing the audience knock you off stride with lots of questions when you know that you're going to cover it in 2 slides from now, and it'll make a lot more sense, and it will be a lot more in context if you wait. What are some of the things you can do to try and kind of keep the ball or
To
keep the
keep
train
things
on?
on the rails.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually a couple of reasons that people get freaked out about questions. Um, One is the biggest one by far is that they're afraid that they're going to look stupid. So they're afraid of questions because if I, and that's the other reason, by the way, that people make really complicated presentations and talk about we only have this much time to cover it. The goal of your presentation is to produce a change in behavior. We talked about that. So we're not trying to complete the presentation. We're trying to complete the person. We're trying to complete the listener. We're trying to involve them in a process that produces a desired outcome. When people talk really fast, don't pause, they don't allow the presentation to lapse into silence in any way, that's usually self-preservation. I don't want people to ask questions because I don't want to risk sounding like I don't know the answer. So the first advice I give is be willing to say, I don't know. It's remarkable how much people like you when you say, I don't know, but I can find out for you and get back to you. In fact, when we take a break here in about 20 minutes, swing by and I'll get your contact information and make sure that we cover this. So that one reason is people don't want to look stupid. The second reason that people don't want to open up for questions is what you just mentioned. They're afraid that it's going to go off on a tangent and they won't ever get the thing back pointed the direction it was supposed to go. So if it's a timing thing and somebody asks a question and you're going to cover it 2 slides from now, they say, well, why are you telling us about the color of people's shoes? And I would probably say something like, because in just a moment, you're going to learn what you can know about someone the first time you see them without any conversation. And a couple of slides from now, we're going to spend a little more time on that. Great question. Next question. And then you're done. So people don't mind being deferred if they know that it's coming, that their question will be answered and that you had actually thought about that. So, people are scared to death, right? Most presenters are scared out of their minds. In the book of lists, it talks about people's number one fear being speaking in public.
Yeah.
Like some of you have probably heard Jerry Seinfeld talk about that. He said, the number one fear is speaking in public. That means that was before death. Death was third. That means if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. That's how Seinfeld put it. So if you're trying to show every bit of information you possibly can on the screen, that makes the problem worse because you will inevitably get questions that are tangential and it's triggered by something they saw in one of the bullet points.
So
if all they see on the screen is brown shoes, colored shoes, no shoes, then they'll stay on task.
So a question for you on that. One of the things that it was a train wreck is if Shantanu or any leader, if they ask a question and you don't know the answer, the natural inclination for whatever reason is to do the opposite of what you just said, and that is to bluff, right? It's to come up with a half reason or a half truth or whatever, just so that you don't, for whatever reason, people hate to say I don't know, but that is one of the most powerful presentation skills is the ability to say I don't know. It gives you credibility. It gives you the ability to kind of come back and follow up later on. And one of the things I saw with Shantanu is he was like that. I can't remember the name of the mutant, but it was that guy that would hit the wall and just keep going through stuff. I can't remember his name, but anyway, that's what he would do is he would poke. And then if he saw that you were bluffing or saw that he would just nail you right through the wall. And he did that for a reason. And he said, I don't want to hear the things you don't know. I don't want to hear the things that you think are right. If you don't know, say it. Just say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And I will loop back around and I will let everyone know the answer. Is that a way to approach it?
Yeah, it really is. because people's, especially in a situation, uh, especially in a context where there could be some animosity is the only word that pops in my head. But let's say you're in a sales situation, right? And somebody's thinking in their heads, I don't want to be sold to. I don't want this guy to take all my money. I got to get the best deal I can get. There's always a little bit of a wall up there. And in those situations, more than any other, people's BSO meter is set to stun. And so if you're bluffing at all, they can usually detect it really fast. If you say, I don't know. I'd never even considered that. I I might venture to guess that it's such and such, but I can find out for you. That's something we ought to address. Then people are thrilled by that. I did a presentation once I did a 4-day training to one of the largest news organizations in the world. And later some feedback came back on that session. Somebody wrote a letter talking about the training and said, my favorite thing about the whole deal was that when Nathan didn't know the answer, he just said, I don't know. He said, then we knew we could trust him and he wasn't just going to make stuff up that we would end up paying for later. So honesty is usually the best policy.
Plus, it reinforces it. It almost says you're smarter than me because you had the question and I didn't think about it. It almost reinforces that relationship that they were astute enough to think of a question that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And it gives you the opportunity to come back around again with some reinforcing information to continue to drive that message that you've been wanting to share during your presentation.
Yeah, it really can have that effect. The other thing that you can do in some of those situations is turn it into an exercise. And that can be a very compelling way um, to help people understand things, especially if you're training. So if the presentation is being given in a training context and somebody asks a question that you don't know the answer to, you might use that as a time to go through an exercise together with the class and say, okay, let's start with what we do know and see if we can arrive at a correct answer to that question, because that's a very interesting way to think about it. And I've done that thing many times. It's fantastic. People really get engaged in solving the problem if you're starting at a place of shared knowledge and the presentation is focused on the desire that they have to enhance performance, to solve problems, to advance their business. If that's a conversation you're having, those are the kinds of exercises you can do. If the conversation you're having is, let me tell you about every single feature, then you're leaving the burden on your audience to figure out why it matters. And this is a really, really big deal. If I go in and talk about my shiny object, whether I'm selling or training or speaking at a convention, right? If my speech or my presentation is all about shiny objects, knowledge, products, things they have to remember, and it's not about them, then we'll never have a situation where they buy in. And the reason is because it leaves the burden on them to figure out why it matters to them. The more you tell someone, especially if you're just dumping a bunch of knowledge on them, the more you tell them, the more you dilute their ability to sort out why it matters. And they leave thinking, man, that's complicated. I don't know if I could do that. That is so complicated. Or if it's a sales situation, then they demand an RFP. An RFP is very often just a Hail Mary pass to try and figure out if this thing that they just told us about, where they told us every single feature that could possibly be exploited, I now have to do an RFP to see if this thing they have can beat up that thing somebody else has. And often the revenue is awarded to who has the longer list, without any real connection to advancing their business. If you want people to believe what you're saying, and you want them to trust their capability, and you want them to retain the message and the point that you were trying to get across, keep it simple. Don't put all the burden on them to solve the problem. So the conversation should be, here's what to do, right? If you want to be successful in the following way, do this. That's quite a bit different than, if you want to be successful, use this. Use and do are completely different. They are very often polar opposites. The most powerful presentations you will ever give will be the ones focused on what to do and what the result will be, and not the ones focused on what to use, because our stuff can beat up their stuff.
It's a great point. Let's maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about stage presence.
Okay.
One of the reasons that people are so afraid of presenting is they don't want to look foolish.
Right.
Because they don't want to look foolish and they're nervous and they have anxiety and all of that, a lot of that comes out in their body language, right? It can be, moving their hands too much, or shuffling, or looking down, or things of that nature. We all have that issue, and I know that that's one of the things that you work with executives about, is kind of that stagecraft, or that ability to present in a confident manner and to look as though you're as confident as you want them to think you are.
Right. Yeah. So the first part of stage presence is actually not stage presence. The first part of stage presence is story. So if you want to feel comfortable with what you're saying, turn it into a story. And a whole bunch of the nervousness will just go away. It'll just evaporate. Now, people are still afraid to be seen. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the whole thing where you'll see people's knees start to shake and they get incredibly nervous because they're afraid they're going to forget something. The chance that you forget your story is pretty slim. The chance that you forget a particular line is pretty high. So get the story first. Second, get out from behind the podium. So if you want your audience to connect with you, regardless of your facility with body language, regardless of your level of comfort, get out from behind the podium. It's amazing what it does. Because the moment you do that, you're making yourself physically vulnerable to the audience, and they will subconsciously connect with that. Third is, don't be afraid to be embarrassed or afraid. There have been several studies done that show when a person blushes because they're embarrassed, it produces a physiological response in other people that are present that makes them like the blusher more. And it's because we've all had that experience. Now, as far as the body language itself, the first thing I tell anyone, executive or not, is stop worrying about your hands and put them at your sides. And that freaks people out. Those who are hand talkers can put their hands at their sides and then occasionally gesture with their hands, and that can be effective. But for people who don't know what to do, and they sit and fumble with the remote until they drop it, and they shake all the time, and you'll see them put their arms out in front of them, kind of palms up all the time while they're talking, as though they're having an argument over a pizza. That's really never a good way to get your point across. So you can watch actors and actresses who are really, really credible, who really get the point across very well. I was watching an episode of The Good Place. Kristen Bell is masterfully good at this. There were several scenes where her only gestures were with her face and her hands were just at her sides. It's kind of remarkable how much you can gain from seeing someone's facial expression without the distraction of awkward body gestures that seem either rehearsed or like the person's going to pass out. So put your hands at your sides, relax your shoulders, and know the story you're going to tell. And your audience will be on your side. Your audience is not there to mock you. Unless you're in a competition, they're not there to do a write-up about how well you stand. And if you're self-conscious about your weight or the mole on your left cheek or your one crooked leg or whatever it is, hiding won't help that. Being vulnerable will. And your audience is, you endear yourself to your audience by being vulnerable. So get out from behind the podium, put your hands at your sides, unless your gestures just start happening naturally. And then tell them the story. And if you're not having to remember some script because they've got bullet points up there and you can't see the monitor, your life is much easier. Another reason to avoid too many bullet points, right? If you can't see the stage monitor and you're trying to read down through them, yeah, nobody likes that.
Well,
Your audience starts looking at their phones.
Yeah, Nathan, one of the things that's interesting, if you look at the top or the most popular TED Talks,
yeah,
many of them are people that are not professional speakers. In fact, they're genuine, and
right.
They walk around and maybe they show a little bit of nervousness, and it's because, like you said, the audience can connect with them and say, you know what, I would probably be worse than that person. They're doing a good job, and they root for you, and they want you to be successful.
Yeah, they actually want to. So that's an interesting concept that you bring up, because your audience wants you to be really good, even if you're selling them something. So you're going in on a $20 million deal, and you're going to hit them with a big old bill. Don't ever make the mistake of thinking that they don't want you to be good at it. Your audience wants you to be good at it. They're actually pulling for you, because otherwise it's a waste of their time, effort, and energy. They want to know, if it's a $20 million decision they have to make, they want you to be good because they want to believe you. They want to know you're credible and that what you're saying will actually happen before they pull the trigger on something like that. If your audience is a bunch of high school students and you're worried that they will, somehow sense your nervousness and realize that you don't have the answer to everything, yeah, they want you to be successful. Otherwise, they're in this assembly for nothing. And some of them are probably really, really desperately in need of what you have to say. Your audience wants you to be successful, and they're going to identify with and pull for you almost no matter the circumstance. If you're talking about a riot, maybe it's a little different, but other than riots, your audience is pulling for you.
Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate your time. I do want to spend just a couple of minutes here to let you brag on yourself about some of the things that you do. As you've seen, Nathan is the best presenter and the best coach that I've worked with and had the experience of knowing. And so, I know it's counter to your personality, but give us a feel for some of the things that you can do to assist people, especially senior leaders that are going to be doing presentations, and touch base with some of the other things that you provide as well.
Okay, let's do these then in the order that makes the most sense, considering tonight's topic or today's topic, whatever this, I don't know what time it is. And that's something I call power presentation skills. And this can be done for individuals or groups. But the whole idea behind power presentation skills is rewiring the brains of your listeners. It's presenting with power, and power comes from things that are not what everybody expects. And so we spend time, if we're doing this in a group setting, often it's a seminar format, and sometimes these can go as long as 2 days, depending on what you want to cover. But we spend time identifying what your listener's story really is. And that's an art that can be learned, but it is an art. And it's almost never what you think. And once you've identified that story, then we spend the rest of the time learning how to tell it and tell it effectively. So it goes through everything from presentation design, the design of the slides, the flow of the thing, body language, voice modulation, the whole deal. So that can be, as I mentioned, individual or group stuff, and there are several different iterations of it. But power presentation skills is a place that I would start. If I were an executive, and I've worked with many of them, um, if you want to persuade your audience, you and I should probably talk, because there are things that we can do to give you far more persuasive power than you've ever had before. What else? Related to that is an effort called the hole in the donut. So in the middle of all plans and sales methods and demonstration methods and white papers and ads and everything else is that story. That's your audience's core story. It's identifying what that really is. So hole in the donut is a 2-day seminar most of the time. Sometimes it's a shorter workshop, and sometimes it's done remotely, especially in the time of COVID. But it's the identifying your listener's story portion of power presentation skills. I'm also certified with Augmendino's Habit Finder. And so I do a lot of coaching in that area. That's organizational DNA is one of the offerings. So it's going into an organization and being able to measure what the collective habits of thinking are inside of a group. Could be your department, it could be your entire company, and where the areas of risk are. Habit Finder is an assessment that an individual can take or a group can take. And within about 10 minutes, we can mathematically identify, it uses a thing called axiological mathematics, which excited my rocket scientist son-in-law, and I have no idea what that is. but it's as accurate as taking the temperature outside. So it can accurately measure habits of thinking that are the ceiling you keep bumping into. So it's mostly subconscious habits of thought. Takes about 10 minutes to take the assessment, and the result is it's so accurate that the chance of it getting something wrong is 1 in 4 quadrillion. The cool thing about this is it's not a personality test. We're not talking about aptitudes. Your aptitudes don't really change. We're not talking about, it's not an IQ test. We're not talking about how smart you are, because how smart you are doesn't really change. What we're talking about is habits of thinking. Habits can be changed. And so coaching, I have an executive coaching program, and I also do individual and group coaching with this. But helping people identify what the ceilings are that they're bumping into and what habits of thinking are producing those, and then changing those habits is just fantastic. It's fun, actually, because you can accomplish so much with just one little change that it kind of blows people's minds. So those are the big 3 things. And there's, speaking engagements. I still do web analytics training. By 2008, I think I was the most prolific web analytics trainer in the world. And then I do speech coaching. So I recently had someone reach out to me in a panic because his book had just been published and shot up high on Amazon, and he's about ready to speak on C-SPAN, and said, I need some help with body language and everything else. So I do a lot of that.
Well, Nathan, the assessment that you were just talking about, I've actually done myself, and it is insane how accurate it is. And
people say they feel naked.
Yeah, it does, but in a good way, right? You're by yourself, and it's okay because you're able to really assess some of the things that have kept you.
Yeah. It's the why doesn't my department respond to my leadership style? How come my spouse is unhappy? Why didn't I get that promotion? All of those kinds of ceilings that we bump into, almost all of those are habits of thought that can be identified and changed. So it's a good one. In fact, if you go to my website, there's a link there to Habit Finder. And for the listeners in this podcast, I'll just say, go ahead and go there and take it for free if you'd like, and see what you think. And then feel free to
give them your address, and then we'll certainly include that in the podcast and the information.
Yeah, if you go to www.natewalkercoaching.com and you look for the link, it's on the left-hand side. You'll see it. It's very prominent. Just look for the link called Habit Finder, and you can click the little button there that says take the assessment, and and I'll get notified by email that you've taken it, and then we could chat.
Wonderful. Well, for two reasons, we got to wrap up. One is I want to be sensitive to your time, but two, my battery on my computer is just about ready to die. Um, but I just want to thank you, Nate. I've been a big fan of yours forever, and you and I have been in the foxhole a number of times, and
Yep.
It's good to. I'm grateful that you were willing to do this, and I just thank you again for your time.
Well, I'm very glad for the opportunity, and I hope it's all helpful.